Tomorrow, we will see something none of us has ever seen before: the criminal prosecution of a former American president. For the first time, Donald Trump will face a jury of his peers in a case that could carry prison time. Trump's hush money and election interference trial could be the ultimate test of the rule of law and the nature of accountability in this country. In less than 24 hours, the prosecution and the defense will deliver opening statements in front of 12 members of the jury and 6 alternates, laying out the evidence for and against Trump's guilt. That's in spite of multiple last-ditch efforts by Trump's team to delay the start of this trial. As a reminder, Trump is charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying records. The Manhattan District Attorney accuses Trump of interfering in the 2016 election by disguising payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels to keep quiet her allegation of a past sexual encounter with Trump as legal expenses. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denies any wrongdoing. He says he'll testify in his own defense, and tomorrow, Judge Merchan will decide how he can be cross-examined if he does take the stand. During jury selection last week, an angry and defiant Donald Trump tried making his case to the only cameras allowed outside the courtroom. Here's a taste of his many hallway press conferences.
It's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. Legal expense. It's called legal expense. That's what you're supposed to call it. But all of these are stories from legal experts saying how this is not a case. The case is ridiculous. There's another one. The case is ridiculous. The judge has to take off this gag order. It's very, very unfair that my constitutional rights have been taken away.
Prosecutors say Trump has already violated his gag order at least 10 times, including sharing a comment on social media calling jurors, quote, undercover liberal activists. Judge Merchan will weigh in on the gag order Tuesday and could fine Trump for those posts. And that's not the only threat to Trump's finances this week. At a hearing also tomorrow, the New York Attorney General will seek to cancel Trump's $175 million bond in his civil fraud case after questioning whether the company that issued the bond has the money to cover it. If the judge agrees, Trump will have just 7 days to secure a different loan or have some of his assets seized. But looming over all these cases is the Supreme Court, which will finally hear on Thursday oral arguments in Trump's claim of presidential immunity. The question at issue here is a fundamental one. How much can a current or former president get away with that the rest of us can't? Make no mistake, if the high court rules in his favor, it could derail all legal efforts to hold Trump accountable for his actions, alter the rule of law, and change the nature of American democracy. Trump has clearly been a little obsessed about all this, posting online about presidential immunity more than a dozen times this weekend alone. Trump will be stuck in New York during his Supreme Court date, but expect his legal team to bring the crazy even without him. As you may remember, Trump's attorney told a lower court a president can be immune from prosecution even for ordering a murder.
Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes.
Just let that sink in. An argument that would let a president or former president get away with murder. And if that's an example of what we could hear this week, buckle up. Joining me now, former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. He's an MSNBC legal analyst and host of the Justice Matters podcast. Also with me, Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer for Slate. Glenn, Mark, thank you both very much for being here. Mark, you're here at the table, so I'm going to start with you. You were initially skeptical of the Manhattan District Attorney's case, but you've come around. What's changed your mind about the importance of this trial?
Well, over the past year, I think Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and his team have made an extraordinarily strong case that this really was a felony offense under New York law, that it wasn't just a misdemeanor involving some kind of low-level record-keeping crime, but that it was tied in fundamentally to federal and state laws involving campaign finance and election interference. That's why District Attorney Bragg has made such an effort over and over again to say this is not just about a porn star or hush money. This is election interference. I think that's a really important point because, we're all watching these cases about 2020 get stuck in the lower courts, not go to trial. This is the first to go forward. There's been a temptation among some cynics to say this one doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. But the fact that it is fundamentally about honest elections and whether Trump can break all the rules that apply to everyone else, I think that matters, and it really raises the stakes here. I was sort of convinced that this was the right time to bring these charges and that they were the right charges because the district attorney has showed that if Trump is found guilty of these offenses, that he truly did conspire to violate state and federal election laws. That is a serious offense, and he should be held accountable.
All right, Glenn, you are the former federal prosecutor here. Were you also initially skeptical of this case, the Manhattan District Attorney's case?
I was really not all that skeptical, Jonathan. When you see the mountain of evidence, okay, this is coming from a former career prosecutor, I understand, but when you see the mountain of evidence that has been amassed against Donald Trump, when the folks who are suspicious of the sort of quality of the evidence in this case go to things like, well, Michael Cohen was lying. Okay, of course Michael Cohen was lying. In fact, in large part to try to protect Donald Trump and keep him out of hot water. But, it's not the question of whether a witness lied previously that will convince a jury about the strength or weakness of the case. It's whether that witness is telling the truth now and whether the witness is corroborated with things like covert audio recordings of Donald Trump and Michael Cohen conspiring to commit the crime. Check with hard evidence like documents and reimbursement checks that Donald Trump was writing, including out of the Oval Office. Check, you take the weakness of Michael Cohen lying and you turn it into a strength because you talk about his motive for lying, which was to help his former boss. So I am not all that concerned that if the jury follows the evidence and applies the instructions of law as Judge Merchan gives it to them, I am fairly confident they may end up convicting Donald Trump, and they may do it in a New York minute.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Glenn, jurors have already had to worry about their identities being leaked. A couple jurors have already been asked to be removed from the case. Might we see other jurors asked to be dismissed?
I feel like it's almost inevitable that we're going to have other jury bumps along the way here. It's not that unusual, Jonathan. When we pick a jury, we send the jurors home for the night. They come back the next day to begin hearing opening statements. And one or more of the jurors are like, you know what, Judge, I came up with some reasons, some concerns, and I might not be able to sit. That happens all the time. And then, early on in the process, the judge, if those reasons are valid, can dismiss that juror and replace that juror with an alternate. I have a lingering concern, Jonathan, that because there are only 6 alternates seated, if we have an unusually high number of jurors who feel like they want to get off the jury, maybe they're feeling uncomfortable. Maybe they've been gotten to. I've had that happen over the years. I hope 6 is enough, and I trust 6 will be enough.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mark, Maggie Haberman in the New York Times, and I'm quoting here, she writes, people close to Trump are anxious about how he will handle having so little to do as he sits there for weeks on end. It has been decades since he has had to spend so much time in the immediate vicinity of anyone who is not part of his family, his staff, or his throng of admirers. What kind of impression do you think Trump is making so far with the jury?
I think Trump has made a poor impression with potential jurors so far. Based on reports from inside the courtroom, we know that he has looked hostile, sometimes even aggressive, as jurors have paraded before him, saying their true feelings about the former president. This is Manhattan. Many of those feelings are far from positive. A lot of these potential jurors have criticized him, said things to his face that he probably has not heard in person for many years since he's so insulated from these criticisms. Jurors pick up on that. They pick up on body language. They pick up on muttering. They take it often as a sign of untrustworthiness, that the defendant might have something to hide. And it's not going to play well for him once this actually goes to trial this coming week.
Hey, Glenn, what do you expect at Trump's Supreme Court hearing on immunity this week?
So, Jonathan, I'm not so concerned that the Supreme Court is going to say a president can commit any and all crimes against the people of the United States in violation of the federal laws and do so with complete impunity and immunity from prosecution. I have a greater concern that they're going to be so interested in what they call outer perimeter immunity, which is not a thing in the criminal law, but it is a thing in the civil law. And, you know, they may conclude that, well, if there are some outer perimeter crimes a president commits, maybe he should have immunity for that. And the only way we will know whether any of what Donald Trump did should enjoy outer perimeter immunity is to send it back to Judge Chutkan to hold all kinds of evidentiary hearings on whether some of what he did might enjoy some outer perimeter protection. Then it can come back to the Supreme Court. Then we can definitively resolve the case. The reason I am concerned about that is it will eat up so much time. Donald Trump may not be tried until, who knows, 2026.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.